Hello, this is Paul Chek. Welcome back to my video blog, my endless series. Today I would like to talk to you about the ingredients of yourself. So the self here is meant to mean your individuality, the you that isn't me. And also you could say the ego itself, because the ego relates to a self or an independent unit of consciousness, if you will. So someone who has thoughts, feelings, ideas, dreams, needs that are unique to them and nobody else, and their mode of perception is unique to them. In other words, even identical twins having the same chocolate cake are not having identical experiences, and this type of thing has been researched and shown to be true. So I'm going to take you through a little exploration. We'll look at it today using a Buddhist concept, which I learned from studying Buddhist literature, but also hear Thich Nhat Hanh use a fair bit in his lectures and books. And that will fold us into the opportunity to share in a bigger reality than ourself, which is our collective reality as it relates to life on Earth. And I will share an opportunity for you to join me in participating in being a positive force of change and inspiration for others to move us toward a direction of harmony. So with that said, let's have a look at the ingredients of yourself. So if we go to a real beautiful basic Buddhist concept, because the Buddhists at large are a group of people that believe that the ego is really an illusion, and they have very many good reasons for that. Now, one of the ways that they point that out is Thich Nhat Hanh often says a flower is made of non-flower elements. The self is made of non-self elements. So if you look at this flower that Vidya beautifully drew for me, that flower is actually made of chalk. It's a beautiful flower, but its flowerness is composed of things other than the flower itself. So when we look at the human being, or even another flower, if you look at a flower that's a real flower outside, it too is not made of flower. It is an expression of what we will call the archetype, or the idea of a flower, which is obviously an idea of the earth, of the sun, of the moon, and of the entire cosmos. But that flower is made of water, it's made of sunlight, it's made of minerals, it's made of air, and it has some form of internal metabolism. So there's the principle of fire, and therefore you can see that the flower itself is actually not made of flour. It's made of non-flower elements. So now let's kind of take a same look at ourselves. So here we see the earth, and we have water, earth, fire, sunlight, air or atmosphere, and space. So we have earth, water, fire, air, and space. And those things in this arena is where our sense of self comes when we have a body. So when we look at the earth as the prerequisite for having a body, if there was no earth, you wouldn't have an earth-based body. You would have something else, if anything. So if we take the human being and say, well, what is this self made of? No matter what we call this person, we'll call it her Margaret if you want, or Jane. We'll pretend that's an actual person there. So what we see is this person is, first of all, it's an idea or an archetype. So the term Adam Kadmon in metaphysics means original man, or the idea of man. And we are all expressions of the archetype, or the overarching idea of man or human. Yet we also have what would equate to a lower mind in metaphysical concepts or science of mind, and that lower mind is our individual mind, in which we have our own thoughts and ideas that often are acting with the higher concepts of archetypes, archetypes being the ideas that are more universal, such a tree. The idea of a tree is anywhere the concept of a tree emerges, for example. The idea of movement is a cosmic principle. Anything in the universe acts out the principle of movement. So at the lower level, we as ego have, this is what I like to eat, this is where I live, this is who my friends are, these are my favorite shows, this is what I do and don't like in anything from sex to education to whatever. So the ego really, first and foremost then, is composed of higher ideas which all minds in this realm need to interact with, and then lower ideas which are working between archetypal ideas and things like manipulating an archetype. Anyone can paint a tree, and it's a unique expression of the archetype that came through their individuality. Next, we are water, and interestingly enough, the amount of water that we have in us in percentage to body mass is relatively identical to the amount of land mass to water mass of the earth, and the amount of salinity or salt in our blood is the same as the ocean. So we already see some very interesting parallels just from that very simple fact alone. Now, we are also fire, which produces warmth in the human body. The solar plexus means sun plexus, that's your digestive and eliminative system at large, and that system is designed to extract energy, which is sunlight that's been put into plants through photosynthesis or animals that ate the plants, etc. But what you see is that everything that sustains our body in some way came from the sun. You could even say that the minerals of the sun or the rock of the sun could be the source of even planet Earth. We don't know. There's theories on that. But in other words, we are the sun in many ways and everything around us. And if you go to Einstein's theory, E equals mc squared, it says everything that you see as matter is made of light. And the sun is obviously a powerful source of light. So we are ideas, we are water, we are the sun, which manifests as the principle of warmth. Interestingly, Steiner showed all the way back in the very early 1900s that the principle of warmth is essential in the body for thought to function. And as a therapist, I can show you easily that whenever we change the magnitude or intensity or degree of warmth in our body, it affects our thinking. And an easy way to prove that to you is think of what happens to your thinking processes if you sit in a sauna too long, and think of what happens to your thinking processes if you get into cold water. Well, as you warm up, your mind can relax, but without warmth, your mind can't function. If you're very, very cold, hypothermic, you can barely think, you can barely talk, you can barely function, but as you warm up, your mind starts to normalize, focus, and then all of a sudden thought goes. So what you see is if you get too hot, your mind shuts down because you're approaching death. If you get too cold, your mind shuts down because you're approaching death. And hot and cold are just measures of warmth. So warmth and the thinking processes go hand in hand. When a body's inflamed, the body tends to be in a state of agitation. Just like if you're wearing a sweater in a building, after a while, if the building's too warm, your sweater overheats you, so it starts to agitate you, and you want to get the sweater off to be comfortable. So as people overheat the planet and overheat themselves, there is, shall we say, a level of agitation, because at an unconscious level, or for some conscious, we are becoming agitated because we're disturbing the natural harmony of the elemental forces acting within us as a complex system of biochemistry that sustains life through biology. We are air. We breathe air and we need air, and everything at large biologically on this planet, with some exceptions like anaerobic bacteria, need air to survive. And we interestingly breathe 25,900 breaths a day, which Steiner showed is exactly how long it takes the sun to make one lap of the Milky Way galaxy, and showed that the average human life is equivalent to 1 day of the life of our sun. So that's where the saying, a day in the life of the sun, come from. So you see yet again, and there's many more correlations like this, that we are the Earth, we are the sun, and we are the galaxy, and it just keeps going out from there. So as you can see, my point here is the self is actually, its illusory nature is becoming more and more apparent, yet though its illusory nature is illusory because we think of ourselves as isolated, we are intimately connected to the planet, to the moon, to the sun, to the stars. Yet if we go too far with ideas that are disruptive, we actually disturb the balance in this very beautiful milieu in which life evolves as we know it. And if we disturb the balance too much, well, you get the same thing as what happens if you put someone in ice water. You disturb the balance to the point that they die. If they stay long enough, if you overheat them in a sauna or a sweat lodge or in any form, even physical exercise, then they die too. Now, when it comes to the air element, Steiner also warned a long time ago in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that human life depended upon trees and bees, and if human beings brought either the trees or the bees to the point, a tipping point, we would go into extinction. That tipping point be that there would not be enough oxygen produced by the trees to sustain all creatures that need to breathe. And if we kill the bees, then we have killed the sex organs of Mother Nature and we will starve to death. And it might interest you to know that we are dangerously close with removing mountaintops for mining coal and removing massive areas of forest and the rainforest at a huge phenomenal rate every day, largely for the production of commercial crops such as beef for fast food and junk food restaurants, and palm oil and soy for the processed food or junk food industry. So we're, as to use the saying, playing with fire. Literally, we are playing with fire. And so it's interesting too, Osho says if you want to be a star, you better learn to play with fire. So the question is, are we going to learn to play with fire well enough to become conscious enough to get out of here and be able to sustain ourselves in the presence of the fire and the light without this physical body? Well, the race is on. If you're not careful, you might get your report card sooner than you expect. And then finally, we are space. You know, two of us can sit in the same space, which shows you that we occupy space. So we really are the world. And this is a very, very important concept today because we have so much scientific materialism that there is a belief that we are something different than the world and that we are different than nature and that somehow we are like kings sitting on top of a kingdom and we can do whatever we want to the kingdom, and somehow we don't suffer any repercussions for what we do to the kingdom, which is a very, very dangerous concept. In fact, it's so dangerous that it's caused many kings to lose their empires, and they continue to do so today. So, a key point here, and Richard Dawkins talks about this in his book, The Selfish Gene, and this is something very, very important to look at. Dawkins says memes, the word meme means ideas, not necessarily archetypes, inclusive of archetypes, but all ideas, have no respect for genes. And a perfect example of that, and one of the things we have to be very, very careful of today, is believing things that science tells us, or that medicine tells us, or that experts tell us. Because so far we can see that the more we listen to these experts, and I'm not saying that their information is useless, I'm saying that there is a wide range of consciousness amongst so-called scientists and doctors and therapists and leaders of all types, and that if a person's consciousness is one in which they think that their self is something that rises above and can control this thing, and that all matter is just something to play with, and somehow we will miraculously live on, and some of them obviously are getting insecure because they're trying to build space stations now on the moon and Mars, but the rest of us won't get there, then that kind of consciousness overlooks the reality that ideas have no respect for genes, and your genes are what guide and direct the formation of a body's cells and many, many other factors. But if your ideas are in conflict with your genes, then you run around from doctor to doctor and therapist to therapist and pill to pill and gimmick to gimmick, trying to get rid of your pimples, get your brain to stop being foggy, get your dick to stand up, get your vagina wet again, and every other conundrum under the sun, and you end up with piles of functional medicine tests and bags of pills. And really, it boils down to something as simple as this. A meme. Here is a meme. Things go better with Coke. They spend about $380+ million a year, Coca-Cola, to get you to believe that. So there's a meme. But look carefully at what happens from soda pop consumption alone, and you will see that Coke, the idea things go better with Coke, has zero respect for your genes. It'll rot your teeth, acidify your body, acidify your blood, screw up your breathing rate, encourage fungal infections, encourage parasite infections, cause early onset osteoporosis, and all sorts of other stuff. But you see, the idea reigns superior because the idea of a human being's ideas is such that you can actually become conscious while at the same time being unconscious of the ramifications of your ideas and how they play out in reality. And if you get trapped in the idea, you keep trying to address the idea at the same level it was created. In other words, science says, well, if you have this, just take this pill, or just get this surgery. Or if your dick doesn't stand up, just get a Swedish penis enlarger, and that'll fix everything. So you see, ideas keep working in and against ideas, always forgetting that there are ideas upon which the actuality of life emerges and rests upon like a foundation. And if those ideas are not attended to, such as the trees and the bees, then all this other mental masturbation, no matter how many PhDs you have or how scientific the study, turns out to be either ice-cold water for too long or too much fire and heat for too long, and thinking ceases, and you get to find out what garb you wear when you're not here anymore. Okay, so now, to summarize then, the self, or what is often referred to as an ego, is actually made of everything else. Within the ego is our own ideas and perceptions. Psychologically speaking, that's called a self-plex, which means a complex of our own ideas, which we believe. And to the degree that you believe them, then you could say that you have self-confidence or you're deluded. Either way, you could be confident in yourself, which means you're open and receptive to challenging your own ideas and having them challenged, or you're deluded, which means you're rigid and your ideas are fixed. And as Dan Siegel says, there's two banks to the river of mind. The middle of the river is integration. One bank is chaos and the other is rigidity. So if our ego keeps bringing us into chaos or rigidity, then we really do have something that is fixed and something that is unique to yourself, but paradoxically now works to create the illusion of separation in what is ultimately intimately connected and a perpetual expression of itself as a capital S-E-L-F, the whole. Now, it's very important for all of you, in my opinion, to look at Noam Chomsky's documentary, Requiem for the American Dream, because it really now is pertinent. It has been for a long time. I mean, Rachel Carlson wrote the book Silent Spring in 1972 and scared the hell out of people then. Well, what we've done to the planet since 72 would make her roll over in her grave. And, you know, I don't want people to think I'm a doomsdayer or whatever, but I am saying we are now at a point where we have a great opportunity for all of us to hold hands, grow together, learn together, become much more conscious and much more truly spiritual people, and get over our individual ideas about he said, she said, black people, Muslim people, all that stuff, and get right into the fact that every one of us is a flower in the soil of this beautiful planet, which we have now reached the point where things aren't going better with Coke as a metaphor, and it's time for us to really hold hands and get deeply spiritual and committed to what really is important for our children, for our future, for our life. And I'll just ask you, what do you want to breathe? What do you want to eat? You know, do you want the oceans to rise up and swallow your home? I mean, there's many, many issues involved here. So it's a great time for us to stop playing silly games and burying ourselves in iPhones and Mickey D's and cheese McNuggets and everything else that turns your head into a zombie easily programmed by bogus television. So in the documentary Requiem for the American Dream, Noam Chomsky outlines 10 principles by which the ruling elite, the wealthy people of the world, there's about 85 people, for example, have as much wealth as half of all the people on this planet right now. So if you count their billions, only 85 people own as much wealth as half of all the people on the planet. That should concern you a little bit. So he shows in the documentary the 10 principles that are used to concentrate wealth and power and to create the illusion of democracy and to effectively diminish the reality of a democracy. The concept of a democracy should be carefully analyzed. When a man named Donald Trump, who's gone broke many, many times, a long string of court cases against him for ripping people off, and participated in very poor quality TV, largely for people who are totally unconscious and drinking too much Coke, becomes the president of the United States. Now, not to say that Hillary Clinton was a better choice, just to say that we're now at a point where we should be smart enough to realize the whole thing's rigged, and we have to start being our own politicians and being our own farmers and our own educators and our own caregivers, because the same consciousness that puts someone like that in power is what's telling you which vaccinations you have to take and what is or isn't going to be on the labels of your foods, and where your kids are or are not going to go to school if they don't follow certain rules and regulations, and what kind of energy you will keep paying for, even though we've had technology for free energy since Tesla was here, and the list goes on. So what Chomsky identifies as these 10 principles: reduce democracy, shape ideology, redesign the economy for their benefit, all of this is for their benefit, attack solidarity, which is any group of people working together for the common good, run the regulators, which means control the people that make the laws, engineer elections, hallelujah, keep the rabble in line, that represents the workers for the large corporations, manufacture consent, in other words, hire people to do research that has the outcome that you want, and let them twist the math and the statistics and play all sorts of games to produce the facts that you believe in, that are then told to you on television as the word of God, so you go out and buy more silly shit that doesn't work for anybody. And then marginalize the population, which means keep you separate. You'll never be the ruling class. You'll always be in serfdom. And this goes all the way back to India and slavery and Egypt and everywhere else. So as you can see, some ideas die hard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer you all on the 25th of this month, coming up in a few days, a webinar called Take Back Your Health 2017, which you can go to www.chekinstitute.com. There's a banner there. You can sign up for the webinar if you're not already on the signed up as a member. It's $24.95 it's a 1-hour presentation with a little Q&A as time permits. There's also a membership where you can sign up for a year and get a discount. If you're a Chek practitioner who's at current status with the Institute, the webinar is free for you. I will put a hot link to this right in the subject page below the video you're watching right now, and the link to the Noam Chomsky documentary Requiem for the American Dream, or An American Dream, and I highly recommend both to you. So in closing, resources: Requiem for the American Dream by Noam Chomsky, my book How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, many of you know, gives you self-assessment questionnaire so you can identify where to begin, and shows you in a very carefully constructed order how to implement those changes to get the best results. My audio workbook program, You Are What You Eat, which is 9 hours of audio all about the stuff they do to food and don't let you know, and have passed laws so you can't know, and food packaging, food storage, many of the things that I couldn't put in my book, How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, because it was too long for publishers, none of which would publish it, because, as they said, if what's in your book is true, then every author we have on these topics is wrong. It'll start a battle if we publish this book, so I had to publish it myself, but thanks to people like you, we've sold, I think, 150,000 copies, which would make it a bestseller. So the last four doctors you'll ever need, my multimedia ebook, is a beautiful synthesis and shows you how to tie all these key components of living well together. And for those of you that are ready for some more training, more in-depth and integration of my 4 doctors concepts, the Eat, Move, and Be Healthy concepts, and more, you can do my HLC1 online course, where Angie, Chek, and I share how to do this in your life and take you deeper in carefully planned lessons so you can digest it and put it to work. Thank you for joining me today. Hope to share with you on the webinar where I go through each of these principles and show how we can use the principles to create health and freedom in 2017. Thanks for joining me. I'm Paul Chek.